Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to kick off the Merfolk of the Multiverse series of lore videos. I want to explore all the different merfolk that have existed throughout Magickind, throughout Magicdom, however you want to put it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with the Vdalian Empire, which is really the first one that we get any view of in Magic the Gathering, starting all the way at the beginning of the game. So let us, my friends, dive into that lore. The history of the Vodalian merfolk actually stretches all the way back to the very beginning of Magic the Gathering. In the very first printing, in the alpha printing of Magic the Gathering, we actually got our first glimpse of two different merfolk cards, and both of these individuals are specifically Vodalian merfolk. We can tell this based on the names of the merfolk, in fact. The first one we're going to talk about is Merfolk of the Pearl Trident, and Order of the Pearl Trident was actually a military order of Vdalia. That's how we know these people specifically hail from Vdalia. Now, the flavor text will be a little bit misleading and confusing when you take a look at it. It says, most human scholars believe that merfolk are the survivors of sunken Atlantis. Humans adapted to the water. Merfolk, however, believe that humans sprang forth from merfolk who adapted themselves in order to explore their last frontier. Now, the Atlantis term is not actually an accurate representation of where these merfolk come from, and we will cover that. Next, I want to talk about the Lord of Atlantis. Now, unlike the Merfolk of the Pearl Trident, the Lord of Atlantis actually has some nice striking artwork. The Merfolk of the Pearl Trident artwork is passable, but not really that exciting. I fell in love with the Lord of Atlantis artwork when I first saw it. It's very colorful, and honestly, seeing it on a card, Alpha, Beta, or Unlimited, it's a lot more rich and deep. It's very enjoyable. But anyways, Lord of Atlantis is 2 blue for a 2/2 Lord of Atlantis creature, which has been changed to Merfolk in more recent times. All Merfolk in play gain Island Walk and +1/+1 while this card is in play. And this effect is explained by the flavor text that says, a master of tactics, the Lord of Atlantis makes his people bold in battle merely by arriving to lead them. Now, I said both of these cards are tied into Vdalia based on their names, and that is true with the Lord of Atlantis as well. Because while Atlantis is a human mythological construct from our real world, in the world of Magic the Gathering, there actually is no Atlantis. What happened is the merfolk trade with this seafaring culture, the Vdalians, and merchants from that culture that came to do business with the merfolk couldn't properly pronounce the name of the colony that they were dealing with. There's a colony of Vdalian merfolk specifically called Atlinshies, and that name means freedom's warmth in Vdalian, but the Vdalian merchants had a really hard time pronouncing this. So as a result, they thought that this colony, this offshoot of artisans, because Atlinshies is specifically a colony of artisans, they thought that it was Atlantis. So that's actually where we get the name Atlantis, and this is the first introduction that we have to these merfolk, and this wouldn't be expanded upon until we reached the time of Fallen Empires. Fallen Empires greatly expanded upon the lore and story of what was going on with the Vdalian Empire. In fact, that's the first time we see it specifically mentioned in terms of being called Vdalia instead of just having the concept of Atlantis. Now, Vdalia was a large militaristic society, so they do not value the finer things in life in terms of artistry and things like that. They had a rigid caste structure where you would fall into different categories and have a different position in society based on what you did. So obviously at the top, you have your ruling class. So you have your nobles, your king and queen, because merfolk do have kings and queens in the Vdalian society. Right directly under the rulers comes your warrior caste. That's where you have your Order of the Pearl Trident, and you have that followed up by your mage class. After that, you have your merchants and common laborers. And at the very, very bottom, we have our artisan class. And that is actually why you had the artisan caste had, at one point, they had actually been treated well within Vdalian society. But as Vdalia turned its eye towards imperial growth in terms of trying to conquest and take over different parts of the seafaring world, like different oceans, all that kind of thing, military and political skills became more highly regarded than craftsmanship. So since these artisans were feeling unappreciated and also discriminated against, they're literally the lowest of the low in the newer style of Vdalian society, the artisan class requested the ability to start a new colony that, by mutual agreement by both the artisan's desire and the ruling caste of Vdalia, they were like, okay, look, you can set up your own colony, but you need to be far away from us. We want you wretches out of here making your pointless little artistic tools. We don't care about any of that. So they were located far away from the imperial government. Now, they established and grew there to the point where you have the Orvadian merchants coming and doing trade with them. That's also how we get the name, obviously, Atlantis, as we spoke about earlier. And Atlinshies was perfectly content to be this kind of splinter group off on the side. You know, they weren't part of the main Vdalian membership. They weren't worried about, they were left to their own devices until the Brothers' War, which was this massive fight between Urza and Mishra. The Brothers' War and the resultant Silex blast that devastated Dominaria caused massive upheaval for the Vdalian Empire, specifically in terms of the Homarids. So the Vdalian Empire was located in the Voda Sea, which encircles Sarpatia. There were once warm waters surrounding this. Now, as a result of the Silex blast, that ushered in the Ice Age. Now, that obviously affects not only land masses, but water, like water groupings as well. And as a result, you had the waters around Sarpatia cooling, and there was an actual trench that was created in the waters as well as a result of the Silex blast. Now, up until that point, before that point, the Homarids, which are these gigantic, like, lobster creature beasts, they were actually trapped in their Antarctic area because they can only thrive in very cold temperatures. So after the Silex blast occurred, the tectonic plate extending from Argoth southwards from Terracer was completely shattered. And this massive trench that ran north and south between Terracer and Sarpatia gave the Homarids the entryway that they needed to get their way over to the Vdalian Empire, into the Voda Sea, where they could actually cause havoc. So they started to encroach on the Vdalian civilization. Now, Homarids are they're essentially mindless crab people. They're large, 8-legged bipedal lobsters that are between 5 and 7 feet in height. They're crab or crayfish-like in appearance. Now, they don't have a high level of developed intelligence like merfolk do. They are more insectile, and they're just basically looking for new grounds to feed and spawn in. So they started to encroach upon the Vdalian lands, right? There was a number of issues that were cropping up because of these Homarids. The Homarids were raiding into traditional food stores and sources of food for the Vdalians. So this is the time of Empress Galina. If you've actually seen the Empress Galina card, she is actually one of the few merfolk that has her own representation. If you take a look at her, she has a very regal kind of feel to her, sitting there in a giant conch shell throne with her little seal pups, the same way that royalty would have little puppies. She's pretty powerful too. If you look at her ability, 2 blue, 3 colors for a 1/3. Her ability is pay 2 mana, gain control of target legend or legendary permanent. And the flavor text says, above the waves you may be mighty indeed, but down here you belong to me. This speaks to her level of power in acquiring whatever she wanted. Now, she was the ruler at the time where the Vdalian society was very, very oriented towards military might. And she was the sole ruler, as her husband had actually been completely wiped out in a previous altercation. So she was the sole ruler at the time of Vdalia's downfall. There was no way to stop the encroaching situation of the Homarids. There was nothing that could be used to pull them back and stop them from gaining dominance. They were just, you couldn't barter with them, you couldn't reason with them. They were there to relentlessly take over Vodalian lands. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So Galina made the decision that she was, at first, they were fighting back. The military was doing a half-decent job, but through attrition, the Homarids spawned faster, and they just kept coming. As the water cooled more and more, it affected the merfolk's ability to bring in food, to bring in medical supplies. So it reached a point where Vdalia had no food stores left, no medical supplies, and they were under constant attack by Homarids. So Galina made the decision that they were actually going to travel to Atlinshies and take over the colony. They were going to go to this little splinter colony, which was still admittedly fairly small, but it would be somewhere they could go that was far enough away and also located in warmer waters that the Homarids couldn't follow them to. So she had her most powerful mages construct a portal that would teleport her and all of her troops, her remaining troops, to Atlinshies. Now something went wrong, and they actually ended up being transported to Atlinshies, but when they arrived, Atlinshies was much larger than it was supposed to be. There was no logical way that this society, this tiny little society of artisans, could have grown to the size they were at. So it came to be known once they surveyed the area and realized, wow, the waters have risen quite a bit. There's land masses that are now submerged that weren't submerged. What's going on here? Well, the situation was they had actually been transported 3,000 years into the future. So they were literally at Atlinshies, but the whole situation was one where Atlinshies was bigger than Vdalia at this point. It was this massive sprawling thing because they had had 3,000 years to grow while the original Vdalia had been crumbled and ruined. So basically Galina came in with her troop of all these soldiers from militaristic Vdalia, and they've come to Atlinshies, which was settled by artisans. So Atlinshies is a democracy at this point. It is ruled over by different merfolk lords that sit in chambers and debate things and things of that nature. They don't have a massive army. They have troops, obviously, as evidenced by the Lord of Atlantis, and the Order of the Pearl Trident. They do have some level of troops, but they're nowhere near the level of power of the troops from the original Vdalia settlement, where they focused on military might. And in this new artisan society, people are valued more for their ability to create, or, politics obviously played a high level in this society as well. Either way, Galina shows up and she infiltrates the city with her troops. She heads to the area where all the rulers are, and she says to them essentially, I'm Empress Galina. Your entire civilization only exists at my sufferance. You guys were the artisans that we allowed to splinter off and create your own colony. Well, that's coming to an end. I am reasserting my authority over this particular colony, and you guys are done. I am now the new monarch over this. We're disbanding the democracy, and you're done being the rulers. And so essentially, they just scoffed at her and were just like, guards, escort this riffraff out of here. Not realizing that was a terrible tack to take with Galina, because she has super martially trained soldiers from thousands of years ago. So she basically snaps her fingers, at which point her troops just swim right up to this ruling class of Atlinshies and just start breaking necks. There's just all the bodies of all the members of the council are all just floating there. And it doesn't take very long at all for Galina to get the word spread. Look, I'm in charge of this now. This is my kingdom. It's rechristened as New Vdalia, the elite warriors of Galina, the orders of the Pearl Trident. Now, interestingly enough, the most important members of the military and political organizations are allowed to have that vivid red coloring. So Galina actually rules over New Vdalia for over 1,000 years. Her reign is long and bountiful, but unfortunately for her and a lot of Vdalia, near the end of the Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria, Yawgmoth turns himself into a massive death cloud that killed everything it touched, and that included most of this new Vdalian society. And Galina was one of the people wiped out, so that ended her 1,000-year reign. Now, at this point, funnily enough, it's interesting how there's a repetition of situations where New Vdalia was established, right? And under New Vdalia's new setup, we had the same sort of rigid rulers, military castes, where artisans are again relegated to the bottom. So another splintering group had splintered off of Vdalia and created a new artisans colony further away called the illiterates. It's spelled with an E, but it's funny. It's the illiterates, really, but it looks like illiterates, which is amusing to me. But they formed an artistic commune set up in a deep trench to escape from Vdalian society, and thanks to the sacrifice of Beau Lavar, the Vdalian society was actually saved. They ended up in a whole series of chaos as survivors from the other Vdalian society made their way to this artistic commune. But in this situation, they didn't have a militaristic takeover. They were able to establish a more democratic style society. So under the current leadership, it's Emperor Mahai II with Empress Anika, and they have a couple of highly intelligent daughters that hopefully together they will end up with the society thriving as a result. That's actually where it gets left off. They still do have an insular society with 5 traditional castes, and even still, the artisans are ranked at the bottom under other castes, which is it's kind of funny. But their society has drifted towards a more liberal perspective. So even though they do have a sovereign, like a king, it is more of a ceremonial figurehead, like the situation we have in England, for example, in the real world, where there's still a queen, there's still a monarchy, but really there is an elected democracy. And so there is a council of caste leaders that rules over all of Vdalia in this situation. You have the Stoverods, which are the traditional martial and proud aristocrats. You have the Savash, which are religious diplomats. You have the Orzvetsia, which are bureaucrats and traders. This is the greediest caste. You have the Shurnaz, which are the lower class laborers, farmers, and soldiers. And you have the Volsh, who are scholars and artists, most likely to use education as an antidote to xenophobia. So now the rule of Vdalia is governed by members from each of these castes. So it's not the same sort of exact rigid structure, although some castes are more powerful than others. They all have a voice in the governance of Vdalia, and there is the religious order, in case you're curious, they worship Sylvune, the goddess of the pearl moon, and the religious members are called the Society of the Conch. So to me, overall, this was an excellent place to start the Merfolk of the Multiverse series. We will talk about a number of other merfolk groups and what's happened with them. But for me, starting at the beginning with this overall fairly interesting story was how I wanted to launch. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the first of the Merfolk of the Multiverse series. Let me know what you think in the comments below. These kind of videos take a fair bit of work. If you like what I'm doing here, you want to support it, hit me up on Patreon or become a channel member. Like the names you see scrolling by here, these are all people who have made that excellent choice. And I have a couple of options for you here. The top option is a video talking about the origins of Merfolk in Magic the Gathering based on a short story in one of the novels. And the other option I have at the bottom here is a playlist of all of my lore flavor videos here on the channel. So thanks for coming by, everyone, and I shall see you all tomorrow.